A pardoned January 6th rioter was arrested again, this time for allegedly making terroristic threats against Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. Only this time, the defendant, Christopher Moynihan, isn't being prosecuted in federal court. He's being prosecuted in state court in New York State. Here to discuss the development with me is a former New York prosecutor, Julie Rendelman, my former colleague. Julie, great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Thank you. So I want to talk to you about this. We discussed this case a little bit. And what was curious to me, I've been covering cases involving threats against lawmakers for some time, and I usually see them happening in federal court. And this is a case that is being brought against Christopher Moynihan, who was pardoned of his January 6th related federal crimes and is now being brought to, I believe, Dutchess County Court in the state of New York. What is your initial reaction to this case? I'm going to read, before you answer, just some of the allegations against this pardoned rioter who broke into the Senate, was pictured with QAnon shaman. We're going to put it up on the screen here. And the accusations against him now is that in mid-October, October 17th, he sent text messages that said, quote, Hakeem Jeffries makes a speech in a few days in NYC. I cannot allow this terrorist to live. He wrote in another text, even if I am hated, he must be eliminated. I will kill him for the future. So these are text messages. How does this land in state court over the terroristic threats statute?
I mean, one would argue, Adam, I mean, when you talk about like, what do you think first blush is, I think first blush, that it's interesting that the state is handling a case that both you and I normally would see the feds jump in right away. And so, I think we inevitably come to the conclusion, is it because there's concern that the feds won't handle it the correct way, since we know what happened the last time? We also know that by bringing it to the state instead of the feds, the pardon power doesn't exist like it does in federal court. But I think I'm making assumptions, maybe fair, maybe unfair. They both have jurisdiction, arguably. Dutchess County has jurisdiction over this case. The question is, do the feds have jurisdiction? And if they do, why did they not take it? It'll be interesting to see what, if any, additional information comes out as to why it turned out that way.
Yes, I think it's interesting too. And as you said, this is, according to the court papers, this is a crime that allegedly took place in New York with a defendant in New York, the victim, and a New York congressman. I'm going to read a statement by Hakeem Jeffries. He said, I am grateful to state and federal law enforcement for their swift and decisive action to apprehend a dangerous individual who made a credible death threat against me, and with every intention to carry it out. Part of the reason we're talking, I did find it strange to see a case against a U.S. congressman, a federal representative of the people, being handled in this way. And how can people, even, if he goes out of the way, Leader Jeffries goes out of the way to commend federal law enforcement's role in this case. But what does it say that we seem to be in a time where it's being questioned, does the federal government pursue crimes against certain types of victims?
I hear you. I'm not sure I'm taking the leap yet in regards to this specific case. I don't think we're at a point where the feds are not investigating a clear threat, which, by the way, this wasn't just a mere conversation. This was a threat. He was specific as to where he would be and what he intended to do. So this is not something that we can chalk up to someone just, expressing their free speech. And so look, I think it's hard to take away the fact that the individual that is accused in this case was involved in January 6th and was pardoned. And so I think it's hard pressed for anyone when we talk about these cases. And by the way, we've talked, I was reading something about how many individuals that were pardoned in January 6th had been rearrested for other types of crimes. I believe this was the first person that was rearrested for something involving threats to a congressman. But nevertheless, there have been multiple other individuals that have been arrested. And I think, of course, it naturally draws attention. And the question, especially when we have the expectation that this would be handled federally, and it's not, we start to wonder why. Now, by the way, if I was Hakeem Jeffries, there's an argument to be made. I want it to be the state because there might be an argument that I've lost faith in not necessarily what the federal agents, I think the federal agents did a great job, but they did hand it over to the state. And so I don't think we're questioning them, but I think there comes a point when we see Santos and this one and that one, being either pardoned or commuted their sentence, that we want those people held responsible and not let off simply because of their political views.
Right, absolutely. And I want to be clear here. What I'm discussing is federal prosecutors and the DOJ. I think one question that has been asked, particularly with the threats to judges, we've seen unprecedented levels of threats against federal judges. And one U.S. Senator Whitehouse, has asked for information from U.S. Marshals about where are those cases. And there have been questions from that senator about why we aren't seeing prosecutions of those threats that have sometimes fallen against judges who have ruled against Trump in major cases.
I think there becomes questions as to the rule of law when people aren't respecting, the judges that have been put in place to make these decisions. And so, of course, there's going to be concern, A, when individuals are being arrested and it feels political, and B, when people are not being arrested and again, it feels political.
Right. And in this case, as you mentioned, because of the fact that this case is being prosecuted in state court, if convicted of these crimes and sentenced, Mr. Moynihan cannot be pardoned once again by Donald Trump, correct?
Correct. He could be pardoned by, I believe, the governor, but I don't think that's happening. But he cannot be pardoned by Donald Trump. That is correct. Not this time, Adam.
Not this time. So I'm going to read on that point more of that statement from Jeffries. The person arrested along with thousands of violent felons who stormed the U.S. Capitol during the January 6th attack was pardoned by Donald Trump on the president's very first day in office. Since a blanket pardon occurred earlier this year, many of the criminals released have committed additional crimes throughout the country. Unfortunately, our brave men and women in law enforcement are being forced to spend their time keeping our communities safe from these violent individuals who should never have been pardoned. That was most of Leader Jeffries' statement here. Speaking of other acts of clemency, Donald Trump washed away the 7-year sentence and the restitution, more than $300,000 in restitution for George Santos, allowing him not to pay back the hundreds of thousands of dollars to the people that he victimized. There's recent news where the Republican district attorney for Nassau County released a statement. She said she would not comment on any ongoing investigations, but she did not rule out that one is taking place and denounced Santos's actions, noting that she contributed to that investigation. What do you think is the possibility of real exposure to George Santos on a state and local level?
I mean, there is potential for additional criminal charges. It can be twofold. It can be new charges that were never brought in the original case, because I believe that there was additional investigations. And two, there is an argument to be made. We get into a whole conversation about double jeopardy and what that means regarding federal and state, but there is an argument to be made that he could be exposed to some similar crimes that he was found guilty of in federal court in state court instead.
And we saw that happening with Steve Bannon, right? He was prosecuted in connection with We Build the Wall, a fraud case. And after Trump pardoned him in his first term, toward the end, he was prosecuted by DA Bragg in a case that played out before trial. Would that potentially follow a similar trajectory here?
It could. I mean, New York is a little different in regards to the view of double jeopardy and the idea of two sovereigns. The uniqueness in, I believe, Bannon's case is when he was pardoned, there was no trial at the time. I think he was pardoned pre-trial in federal court. And here it's different because his sentence is commuted, meaning that the conviction of Santos hasn't been taken away. It's just the sentence has been taken away. And so the question becomes whether or not in New York, which is not the same in every other state and jurisdiction, whether or not that loophole exists to allow for a separate trial in state court as opposed to federal court.
How might we see the state prosecutors step in ways that might be at odds with the federal government going forward? How might state prosecutors be more of avenues of accountability? I'll point to one example that just happened. New York Attorney General Letitia James just opened a portal for New Yorkers to send in photographs and videos of alleged abuses by members of ICE.
Correct.
Where do you see this going as we see the proliferation of criminal cases against pardoned rioters, the portal that Attorney General James just opened? Where do you think we'll see state prosecutorial activity happen in the Trump 2.0 era?
So when you talk about, the idea of the attorney general in New York who's being indicted for something that she did in another state, now stepping in regards to potentially, asking people to come forward with potential criminal violations by ICE agents in New York, it does raise the question, are we now going to start to see prosecution of ICE agents in New York and potentially other states? And if that does happen, what is the next step for Trump if that's occurring? Is it going to be they're not going to come to New York? Is there going, you know what I mean? It just, I feel like we're heading down this cyclical bizarre world that I think that is new to all of us.
Do you think that kind of state versus federal prosecutorial arms race is a function of this breakdown of trust, that people do not trust that the federal government is going to be used, that the DOJ isn't going to be used to go after someone who sued Donald Trump and his businesses? And will that breakdown of trust increase this trend of this proliferation of state prosecutions of the kind we haven't seen before?
I think it will. I think it used to be that the reason cases went, state to federal or federal to state was because there was concern that the individual really wasn't being held responsible and they should be held responsible. And it really, in many ways, was that simple. I think now we're starting to talk, I'm not saying in every case, but, and I think the Hakeem Jeffries thing, even though we don't know why it is that it's the state versus federal, it brings out the conversation of, could it be that there is such a lack of trust in the DOJ and the federal government handling that case the way it should be handled? Even the fact that we're discussing it leaves the door open to start to think, is that going to be the trend? Is it going to lead to additional arrests in state court that we've never seen before for crimes that usually were handled by the feds that now are taking on a different role in the state court?
Thank you very much, Julie, for breaking it down, and looking forward to speaking again.
You too, always.
Thank you for watching All Rise News. To find out more of reporting on this and other topics, visit www.allrisenews.com and click subscribe to watch other videos here on Legal AF and the Midas Touch Network.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.